I'm Teresa Caraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. My goal for any episode that I publish is that I teach myself something new. This is a goal I can control, unlike how many subs or views I have. In this case, I typically start with what I'm reading that has taught me something new. And that's my rule for that too. I don't understand people who read things in an echo chamber of things they already agree with. I can get from that either new information or a new perspective. If I'm getting new information, I can get it from a lot of sources and ones that contradict what I believe to be true in many ways because I can weed through that. But if I'm looking for a new perspective, I need someone who is seeing the same reality that I am. And this often means reading behind enemy lines. These are people who the empire thinks of as the enemy. And those are the ones that I'm going to be presenting today in World War III versus worldwide wrestling. Therefore, I will be reading this with extensive quotes. I want to look at geopolitics and the global war of imperialism versus sovereignty, the only war there's ever been. In this corner, imperialism will be represented by Francis Leader's trio of DC, the Vatican, and the City of London. And I will add the August, one world government, which includes the WEF, WHO, BIS, NATO, World Bank, Bretton Woods, and IMF. It will be clear in looking at this list that global domination can only be accomplished through controlling the money. And controlling the money means first controlling the narrative around money. That's why my book, How to Dismantle an Empire, first dismantles the narrative. All of these entities, I suspect, are controlled by the PBI, powers behind Israel. I don't think it's helpful to name that group, even if I knew for sure who they were, which I don't. That what I'm trying to say is that all the rest are following orders. The narrative around money goes back to the simultaneous invention of coinage and Yahweh, both by the intellectual, if not actual, ancestors of the PBI. By this, I don't mean Jews, a word that didn't even exist until the 18th century. I mean those who throughout history used nomadic clans of men and their slaves to do the dirty work of violence and enforcement of taxes in exchange for the right of occupation and a share of the loot. The Yahwists are the August and have been implementing one world government for centuries with nearly complete success. This isn't new. What is new is that three major powers not controlled by the U.S. have joined together: Russia, China, and Iran. Whether they replace the August as a new empire or protect the sovereignty of their members and allies is yet to be seen. Either way, the world is about to tilt on its axis of evil, as termed by the umpire of empire. Zelensky's Hail Mary. Here is my current understanding of Russia-Ukraine. Russia is winning its defensive strategic military operation in Ukraine. For some background on why this is defensive, Kathleen Devaney linked the Mike Renz article that mentions the Nuland orchestrated coup and the Biden relationship with Burisma. He goes into the Atlantic Council and their board of ex-CIA directors who pushed for this war. I'll link my episodes on those at the end. It should be noted that Mike worked for the State Department under Trump, in a point that will be tied in later. Zelensky has flown to the U.S. in a Hail Mary pass to Biden and the UN that Ukraine be allowed to send Army tactical missile systems deep into Russia. and stop fooling around about letting them into NATO. But Ukraine doesn't have the surveillance capability of using those missiles without NATO support, something that Russia well knows. This permission needs to be given post-haste, according to him, under Biden, before the NeoCons are replaced by NewCon artists. Russia has updated its policy on the conditions under which it might use nuclear weapons. If any non-nuclear weapon state, with the participation of a nuclear weapon state, launches an aerospace weapons attack inside Russia or Belarus. I note that the BBC makes no mention of that in Zelensky's victory plan. Oliver Boyd-Barrett of Empire Communications and NATO Wars, one of my go-tos on geopolitics, has written Not Bluffing on Nukes. He quotes Scott Ritter on the U.S. policy of first strike ambiguity, so that Russia and China can be guessing about what would trigger a nuclear attack. At the same time, Trident missiles on U.S. subs have been fitted with warheads that can shatter nuclear silos and take out Russia's whole ground-based nuclear deterrence. What does this mean? The U.S. is forcing a game of nuclear chicken. Russia had no choice but to adopt a policy to launch their entire silo-based nuclear arsenal the moment they credibly detected the launching of a first strike. In addition, they're now taking the same posture of nuclear preemptive strikes, revving their engines. Strangely, Germany has made an agreement with the U.S. to host long-range missiles in 2026 that are capable of being nuclear-armed and hitting Moscow. There was no discussion of it in the German parliament. Of course, that's if there's still a world in 2026. Russian geostrategy. In Why the West Can't Win, Fadi Lama quotes William Engdahl that the deadliest weapon of mass destruction is not in the Pentagon, but the Federal Reserve. He looks at ways in which Russia has defended their economy, which grew tenfold in 14 years from a 1999 GDP of $200 billion to $2 trillion in 2013. He writes, "It wrested control of its energy resources from oligarchs and foreign companies and leveraged its geography to transit landlocked energy producers Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan for distribution through the Russian pipeline network. Russia is also the leading supplier of enriched uranium for nuclear energy power plants, accounting for 43% of global enrichment capacity and 1/3 of global supply. While the European countries are presently moving back to wood and coal, Russia is a leading supplier of both. With food security being critical for sovereignty, Russia made significant advances in agriculture, becoming the leading grain producer and exporter. Russia is the leading wheat exporter with a 20% share of the global market, enjoying a bumper crop in 2022 with the same forecast for 2023. Russia is also the leading fertilizer exporter. Of the world's largest 20 economies, Russia is by far the most autarkic, making it effectively immune from sanctions. The world, on the other hand, is far from immune to a reduction of Russia's energy or food supplies. While the empire can sanction fiat money, Russia can sanction the two essential commodities, energy and food. Fadi also looks at the weapon systems. In Ukraine, not only did the purported U.S. game-changer weapons fail to have any significant impact on the ground, but Russia's demilitarization of Ukraine has turned into a demilitarization of NATO, as the latter runs out of weapons and ammunition stocks, while the Russian military-industrial complex continues churning out weapons and ammo, despite repeated Western assertions that it was running out. So both the military and the monetary attacks on Russia are backfiring badly. This ain't no disco. From the Talking Heads' Life During Wartime, Pepe Escobar paraphrases, "This ain't no World War III, this is a war of terror." He writes, "Russia is fighting an existential war for the survival of the motherland, what it has done repeatedly over centuries. The USSR suffered 27 million losses and emerged from World War II stronger than ever. That demonstration of willpower in itself scares the collective West to death." Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, whose Taoist patience seems to be exhausting, added some color to the big picture, drawing from English literature. He said, "George Orwell had a rich imagination and historical foresight, but even he could not imagine what a totalitarian state would look like. He described some of its contours, but failed to penetrate the depths of the totalitarianism that we now see within the framework of the rules-based order. I have nothing to add. The current leaders in Washington who suppress any dissent have outdone him. This is totalitarianism in its purest forms." One plot uncovered by Russian intel was for Kiev to stage a false flag attack on their own kindergarten or hospital to get the green light for deep missile attacks into Russia. Pepe continues, "NeoCons and ZioCons, as well as NATO vassals, may desire a nuclear war, theoretically, because in effect this would generate massive depopulation. One should never forget that the WEF Davos gang wants and preaches a reduction of human population globally at a humongous 85%. The only path for it is, of course, a nuclear war. But reality is way more prosaic. Cowardly NeoCons and ZioCons, mirroring the example of the Talmudic genocides, at least want to use the threat of nuclear war to bully especially the Russia-China strategic partnership. In contrast, Putin, Xi, and selected global majority leaders, such as Malaysia's Anwar, continue to display intelligence, integrity, patience, foresight, and humanity. For the collective West and its appallingly mediocre political and bankster elites, it's always about money and profits. Well, that may also be about to change drastically on October 22nd in Kazan at the BRIC Summit, when major steps towards building a post-unilateral world should be announced. China Intermezzo. Cynthia Chung has published Why the People's Republic of China is Not Responsible for America's Drug Problem. She starts with an illustrated description of the tent cities that have taken over Canadian cities like Hastings and Vancouver. She writes, "The problem has reached such catastrophic levels that even the mushy liberals are starting to squirm uncomfortably. Clearly, these people who advocated the right for homeless people to live in their East Hastings ecosystem are starting to have issues if the better parts of town are also going to be implicated. In other words, they were fine with it as long as such people were relegated to a designated part of town. But with the threat of this ecosystem becoming the dominant ecosystem, they are now becoming more critical about the problem of the tent cities. And who is to blame? Well, the People's Republic of China, of course. As with seemingly everything wrong with our collapsing society, as well as Mexico, are blamed as the source for this problem for those who have taken all but 2 seconds to think about the matter. I told Cynthia that I would be using the phrase mushy liberal, which captures the phenomenon of empty sentimentality without running the numbers on how policies play out. She then continues with a masterful history lesson in the Opium Wars, Hong Kong, and HSBC, created for opium profits and caught recently building the opioid crisis coming out of Mexico. I linked some of her other articles in the Substack, which I highly recommend if you're interested in geopolitics. These include The Dope Trade in the Crown, a very British wealth of nations, The Real Global Agenda Pushing for War with China, and Sugar and Spice and Everything Vice, the Sin City of London. On the other hand, Naomi Wolf believes that China is behind the U.S. fatalities, injuries, lockdowns, because they make not only the vaccines, but also the PCR tests that take down whole countries. She writes, a CCP-run company and CCP-created product thus decides who can go to work or school, who must close his or her shop, who can or cannot travel. In all of Europe and the US, a CCP-run company decides the formulation of the PCR and antigen tests that go deep into the nasal cavities of Westerners who are forced week after week to test and test and test with these products. When President Biden does a deal with Pfizer in the millions of dollars with our tax money, he is giving a substantial portion of the funds to China. When he spends $1 billion versus omnibus bills for PPE, including millions for PCR and antigen tests, he is writing checks to China. So take all of the above and map it against the 100,000 plus adverse events in the Pfizer documents, the deadly harms to reproduction, the Western baby die-off, the babies in seizures. Map it against the population drop, the rise in disabilities. Map it against the rigid, cruel vaccine mandates aimed at Western defense forces, as well as the most powerful military in the world, that of the United States with Canada, Australia, and all of Western Europe. Map it against vaccine mandates aimed at our police, our healthcare workers, our firefighters, our pilots, our first responders, our kids, our babies. All of this done by a White House captive via Hunter Biden's laptop to the CCP. Add to all of this the evidence of birth rates declining, especially in the West, by 12 to 20%. And Robert Malone and the Bragans agree with her on this, that it is all China and Biden's fault. At least they agree on something. The bleeding edge of empire, Lebanon, Gaza. I have little patience for those who cry about fifth-generation warfare and the omni-war, and yet are silent or even cheerleaders for actual war with like blood and stuff. One of the ex-CIA bosses of the Atlantic Council is Leon Panetta, who dropped drones for Obama and says Kamala will have Zelensky's back. Maybe she'll approve deep missile strikes into Russia. He also says that Israel's detonation of pagers in Lebanon is terrorism, a statement mushy liberals have applauded. He isn't wrong that blowing off the hands, eyes, and kidneys of Lebanese in their own country is terrorism. But it's the NeoCon pot calling the ZioCon kettle black. That's the only choice offered in this worldwide wrestling match. NeoCon Kamala versus ZioCon Trump. Lay your bet for who the Empire umpires have already chosen as the one. My bet is on Trump, who has already been anointed as the new Messiah by 163 Orthodox rabbis. In Make Israel Great Again, Chuck Baldwin writes, at a Republican rally, billed as opposing anti-Semitism, Donald Trump made several remarks that lived up to his title of America's first Zionist president. Using the Make America Great Again mantra, Trump promised his audience that he would make Israel great again, with Zionist mega-billionaire Miriam Adelson looking on. Adelson gave Trump $100 million for his promise that, if elected, he would support Israel's purge of the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. as she and her late husband Sheldon did in 2016 for Trump's promise to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Trump said that the upcoming U.S. election is the most important in Israel's history. In Trump's sycophantic speech on behalf of Zionist Jews, he boasted, "I gave them Golan Heights. I gave them the Abraham Accords. I recognized the capital of Israel and opened the embassy in Jerusalem. And most importantly of all, I terminated the Iran nuclear deal, which was the worst deal ever made in the history of Israel. I was there 4 years, gave them billions and billions of dollars." Also, during his speech, Trump alluded to one of the social media posts that he wrote in 2022, saying wonderful evangelicals are far more appreciative of my Israel record than the people of the Jewish faith. Thanks to Mark Elsis for that link. There is a real difference between Democrats and Republicans, who they will provoke into annihilating the world. Democrats chose Russia through Ukraine, but the tail that wags the dog of U.S. foreign policy has seen that crap out as planned. Trumpians back Israel using Gaza and Lebanon to provoke Iran and the Middle East. China is a wild card that can go high or low, fitting into a run of mushy liberal hearts, black militant clubs, money-grubbing diamonds, or neutered spades. The best that can happen for us in the West is that Russia, Iran, China turn the embargo tables around and cut trade with Israel and NATO countries. Refusing the imperial currencies of dollars, pounds, euros, and yen would have the same effect. This would force autarky on us the way we did to another RIC, Russia, Iran, Cuba. It would be painful, but not fatal, unlike the worst that could happen. And as for the RIC, they've shown that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But letting the world burn while you bet on a fixed political wrestling match just makes you stupid. And for more on Ukraine and Russia, here is Ukraine, the hegemon's last stand. And this is Zelensky howls at the NATO moon. And in the Substack, I will also link the West versus the rest. Thank you for watching.